What I haven't tried to do, when we do our forest management mapping, we have 1,000 training sample points.
Yeah.
It takes me 60 hours to do each region.
It reminds me of the classification lab that we just did in remote sensing. 1,600 training samples. We zoomed in on some of the training samples. And so, for example, a tree in the parking lot was sampled as forest.
Yeah, I know. I know very well. See, that part of the lesson there is, and I said verbally, the way I write it down, is that some of the training samples have changed, because these training samples were way back. And I started teaching the class, and Jane was teaching it too. And
Oh yeah, so yeah,
and they changed, or they were wrong in the first place.
Yep.
So you can't trust other people's training samples unless you really work hard to make it work.
You got it. Yeah, and I'm wondering, like, for example, like the trains with the green roofs, you know, gardens on top of rooftops. It's going to kind of mess up some of the.
Well, yes and no. You know, one of the things that you can do is throw in another layer and like distance to roads.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That way you know you're in a residential.
Yeah.
Well, my neighborhood up here north of campus looks like a forest.
Yeah.
In there.
Exactly. Good.
Yeah.
Couple minutes. Lunch
Isn't that
already.
early?
All right.
Hi. Hey, Kevin, how's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good.
We'll give it a couple minutes and I'll introduce you.
Okay.
Let's finally. And I was going to draft the responses for those 3 questions that were still missing on the self-funded program.
Yeah.
And then I'll get to edit. But I think we're
Nice.
yeah, we went through all those questions when I met with them at that meeting that we had in person. That's why Aaron's like, Jane, I think you've got this. But I will get that done and then we can get that
Great that
submitted.
it already makes sense, kind of thing. So that's nice.
We should do the AI one soon as well. It'd be a good one to get on the books before
Right.
everyone does.
It's making me hungry. I had a good lunch. I'm hungry again.
Special guest stars.
Whoa.
Joe Andrea. You know that?
Yeah, I saw Joe. I talked to Joe earlier today. And there he is. Yay.
Special guest star.
Pretty sharp.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of announcements before we get going on colloquium. We have gone ahead after our meeting last Thursday where we went through everybody's teaching. So that has been put on the schedule. So we will go ahead. Registration's already started. So that's why we wanted to get everybody's names on there. But we'll be going ahead and getting summer letters and then fall letters, fall assignments already done. We will also, for everyone who's teaching, be requiring that you return to campus the week prior to semester beginning, which is when you start payroll. So as of usually the 15th, you're on payroll. That's when you need to come back because we're going to do a bunch of workshops on teaching, but also new orientation for new students to kind of get everybody back and kind of in person as much as possible. So we'll send out that. There'll be some links available too, obviously, for everything now. One acknowledgement is we completely screwed up in the fall schedule and didn't schedule colloquium. My favorite part is all the people who are scheduled for Thursday at 3 o'clock, no one noticed that they are scheduled for colloquium because there's no colloquium. So colloquium in fall only will be 4 o'clock. We will have a Zoom link, but ideally, if students really can't make it, let us know, but we're assuming students will be here. But we also know kid pickup, everything else that's going on. So there'll be a Zoom link too, if people need it for that. But really, the one class we forgot. We're also going to completely change up colloquium and there'll be more news coming on that. But we've had some meetings and we're going to have a colloquium committee that will do speakers so that we can have a more diverse group of speakers. And we're going to kind of target junior scholars at other institutions because that speaker series that will be on Zoom. There will be a limited budget and there will be a colloquium committee. And we will be requesting 2 student reps for that colloquium committee to help select speakers and other things. So that will be coming. Associated with that, and the reason we have Anwar here today is because in the spring semester, everyone who's trying to defend their PhD has to sign up to give a colloquium presentation, right, before they can graduate. And because it's across a semester, some people have to do that pretty early. Others get that really desirable last slot in April. And it causes problems, right? You're trying to graduate, you perhaps can't get that colloquium slot early enough. And so we get a lot of cancellations in spring colloquium. So we're going to completely change it up next year. Next year, there will be 2 conference days where all those presentations occur. They will be on a reading day because we are not allowed to do any exams or anything else. Faculty, we already use one of those reading days for a faculty retreat. That's always, when possible, the Friday. We're just going to make the Thursday the research day when anyone who needs to do a presentation, so for masters, a poster presentation, and for PhD, a full research presentation will be on those research days. So you will know going into a semester that if you need to present or you're trying to get done, that the reading days are the days that you can do that in every semester. Okay, and so we'll announce more, but just, I know you guys are probably already thinking about fall and defenses and everything else. So we're going to go ahead and just try that for a year and see if that helps smooth out the desperate emails that we send out saying, hey, so we need a speaker in 2 days because we had another cancellation program. So that's kind of what happens. And it's great that Anwar could step up, but obviously that's difficult enough when we can't, and we hate having all these gaps. So that's what we're going to try for a year, and we'll see how it goes. I think it'll be better on that research day. We can also do a luncheon. You know, we can do a happy hour for the poster presentations in the evening and make it also kind of a social and more interactive event. So I think it'll be good for that too. Okay, so we will have more discussions on that, but those are some of the ideas that came up from some faculty meetings we've been having, and I think they're both really, really good ideas. But today, we have Anwar. I'm able to fill in with 2 days notice. So we're very happy that Dr. Suni Sapini could actually step up and give this talk and give a colloquium. Plus, I'm getting to see lots of satellite imagery, so I'm really happy right now. So Anwar is going to talk to us, and I can't remember, on non-geography, Neogeography and volunteer geographic information, case studies into collecting and utilizing geographic data online and in the classroom.
Yeah, thank you for letting me fill the spot. Actually, I've been tossing these ideas around for a while, and so I need some motivation to get back to it. It's almost a collection of all my side projects that I was doing while doing my dissertation. But when I started wrapping that up, all these things kind of went on the wayside, so I kind of wanted to revive them. And what you're seeing on the screen right now are live edits of OpenStreetMap. And so for people who are not familiar with OpenStreetMap, it's kind of like a Wikipedia of mapping. It's kind of how it's described. You can go onto it, use it as a normal web map, or you can hit edit and you can actually start tracing roads and buildings on there and provide volunteer geographic information. That OpenStreetMap layer gets digested by Google and Microsoft and all the big people out there and gets put into your phone basically whenever you have your mapping platform. So, whenever you're looking at what the big tech companies are doing, they're synthesizing all this volunteer geographic information to make your phones even more useful. It's pretty amazing to see how much they do though, just with satellite imagery. But the idea with OpenStreetMap, a lot of times people are mapping what they are personally interested in. So a lot of times it's places you've been. So it could actually be even sometimes better information than some analyst sitting at some desk. Okay, so yeah, here's my title, right? The Neogeography and volunteer geographic information. Whenever I was starting to think about this, when we're looking at GIS and teaching GIS, there's this whole other world of online mapping, GIS tools, GIS-like tools being used online. And we don't really get to touch too much on that within our GIS curriculum. And it's starting to become something where it's slowly getting used, it's slowly getting incorporated into our GIS workflows. And so that's what I want you today. I want you to see kind of how I've used it. So first I want to talk a little bit about what is Neogeography, what's volunteer geographic information, but then afterwards, I want to show you how I used it in some research projects and how I've actually used it in the classroom as well. Okay, but the first question I want you to think about is, what is a geographer? Huh? It's almost a bad thing to ask a geography person. what is a geographer? How do you define geography? You're going to get a million different definitions. We're going to say, I don't know exactly what it say. You know, if you go look up online, you see like studying the earth, describing the processes, peoples and places on earth, looking at patterns on earth. And whenever you think about, when I think about this painting from Dutch artist, the Geographer. You see him sitting there with window lit on the map with his compass. Maybe he's drawing a buffer around a line. Got his globes, got some map on the wall. And you know, the idea is the person sitting there synthesizing information, thinking about how do we better understand the place that we're in, right? Here's my picture. I'm trying to recreate that, you know. But you know, whenever you think about a GIS user today, that's what, you know, when you say geographer today, that's a GIS user. You don't really think this picture, you think something more like this. Pulling out your hair in front of a computer screen, trying to get the tools to work, doing very complex analysis. And every once in a while, everything works. And then it's like a eureka moment, you read some kind of discovery that you couldn't make without using GIS. And that's kind of like an enhancement to your pattern analysis and recognition. But whenever you think about what a Neogeographer is, which is supposed to be on the web, this is the picture I think of. A group of friends at a coffee shop, all staring at their phones. You know, not even talking to each other, but you know. And so this is where Neogeography is taking place right now, is on our phones. That information that we're using on the phone, we can interact with it, we can volunteer information to it, like correction. So maybe I can say, oh, I want to go to a vegan coffee shop. I can query my map application, filter for certain attributes of that place, look at reviews and ratings, and I show up and I find out I went out of business. Then I can actually provide a correction back to Google or Apple, whoever, to get that updated in our geographic information. So that's kind of how it's been used in our kind of, you know, big money way, okay? But how can it be used in other ways? So really, what is Neogeography and what is a Neogeographer, okay? That's the kind of big question. And to understand what it is better to understand what it's not. And what it's not is, it's not a GIS, okay, in the traditional sense. So what is GIS, okay? When we think about GIS, we think about a mapping platform, forestry, geomatics, all the stuff that, you know, go look at all the GIS classes on campus, you're gonna see all these different high-level applications of GIS used for all kinds of science and so forth. Okay, and one thing that we like to say is that GIS is not cartography, analysis. So whenever you look at a class like Foundations of GIS, it's a very analytical based class. You learn how to use tools, how to approach problems. And what I say is like we learn how to ask questions and where, spatial questions, okay? So working with data sets and so forth, maybe it's very precise. You have like longitude, latitude, you're digitizing things. It's deliberate. You show up to it. You want to do a particular task. How can I best formulate that task? A lot of people can make money with GIS. The big, you know, big jobs out there. So there's money at stake, and there's some military involvement too with GIS. So even lives are at stake, right? So this is all kind of what GIS, you could say in a nutshell, kind of how it interacts with the computer technology world. Okay, when someone from an IT or computer science point of view look at GIS, this is how they kind of see it. Okay, but Neogeography isn't that at all. Okay, so if you look at Moore's law from Intel, he's a guy who worked at Intel, you notice that every 2 years they doubled the capacity of their processing chips. And so the idea was that you could plot out what the future processing abilities would be just by looking at a logarithmic curve, this exponential growth. So like, for example, the processor that's in your phone is more powerful than the processor that was used in the Apollo missions to take the man to the moon. So, you know, if you take Moore's law, basically the technology being better, better, and better in your hands, you add cheap bandwidth, internet everywhere for free, basically, or very cheap, and you add in the location devices into your phones, you end up with things like Google Maps or Neogeography, okay? And what's interesting about this Neogeographic approaches is that it wasn't invented or made or pushed by or anything with geographers in mind at all. If you go to Google Earth's setup team before, now they started hiring more geographers. They didn't have any geographers, only computer science people there. So a lot of for them, they see things more as a data visualization, data analyst, big data. That's what they're thinking when they're thinking about Neogeography. How can we create new maps? And sometimes they don't think about, what we would think about on best representations of maps. One thing that you could look at up until recently on Google Maps, the world view of the map was always in a Mercator projection. Why? Because those tiles work very well whenever you're trying to cache those out and send them over the internet. Now, if you go zoom out on Google Maps, once you get to a certain level, it actually switches over to a globe. But that kind of perspective is already starting to, change, where Neogeography is becoming more and more, you can say, like GIS online. Okay, I think that when Steve Jobs pulled the phone out of his pocket, he didn't realize he was basically inventing Neogeography at the same time. But that's kind of what happened. We all put personal devices on us, with sensors, GPS sensors, cameras. Now we have air pressure sensors on them. There's even now iPhones with LiDAR. So you can imagine what's going to happen with these phones as they become more and more smart. Okay, so I'm imagining, I haven't seen them do this yet. LiDAR on the phones right now is just to give that blur background effect. But I'm thinking you can use LiDAR on the phones to actually do indoor mapping. That would have been a better use, I think. But those things are coming. So your phone's going to become even more and more powerful of a mapping device. Okay, so basically, when you think about Neogeography, it's interacting with data. The normal non-expert GIS user interacting with data. So what kind of applications you see? Mapping out places, photo albums, the traffic counts, classified as restaurants, keeps going, finding where airfare searches, UFO sightings. It's just whatever people are interested in, right? Not a lot of scientific things going on.
Bicycling app.
And that's actually a good example. You using Strava?
No, this is, what's this thing? Fit meter bike.
Okay, because a lot of these bicycle maps that you get for free, you're thinking, man, how are they making money? They're selling your data back to planning departments.
It's boring though.
Yeah.
Same path all the time.
Well, there's a lot of questions in transportation engineering, like if I build a bike lane, will I attract more bike users to it, or am I going to actually generate more bike users? So there's actually a limit to where if you just build a lot of bike lanes, you're not getting any return on the buck on traffic reduction, because you're going to bike anyways. You would have gone one block over, and so a lot of Strava and all these people actually sell that information, and you don't even realize when you're getting out of degree. And that's part of that volunteer geographic information. How volunteered is it? OpenStreetMap is fully volunteer. You're clicking, you're drawing everything, you know what you're sending. Your phone, you have no idea how much information they're collecting. For example, the phone companies have a basically tracking on your phones and know exactly where you're at all times. And they're seeing your phones as they go on the street networks. They sell your directionality that you travel on the street back over to the navigation companies, who use that to be able to determine things like, is it a roundabout, is it a one-way street? All that kind of information is coming off of your own phone in the aggregate. So there's a lot of stuff that's kind of been happening on those ends where people are benefiting off of it. I think as us, we should benefit off of it as well, right? So, if you look at what's going on, it's usually things like mashups, taking like a data service from one place and trying to map it out. Web 2.0 kind of stuff, like kind of signing in, maybe making your own edits, displaying these kind of little red dots. This is the one thing that you can see why Neogeography is not really GIS. The vector point is not a vector. It's actually a PNG raster. So it's like they eliminated a whole category on only our three point lines with polygons. They have eliminated a whole category with these little bumps. It really makes a big problem when you try to make maps. You're not having dots, you're actually serving up PNGs to people. Hacking maps, or and then also you got to think there's a lot of mistakes on these maps. Not exactly in Switzerland, right? And it's fast, okay, so it causes problems. But if you look at kind of the cool stuff that's going on, like this Mapiful, I kind of like this when they came out with this. This is OpenStreetMap back here. If you go to Mapiful, you can basically generate your own poster and print it out for you. So it's just an OpenStreetMap window, but whenever you start editing it, you customize the headings, the themes. You can move this map around so you can choose your extent. Then it becomes a significant place for you that you can buy, and it sends you the poster for $10. Or things like this, mapping geotag photos. That's kind of always been the big thing about Neogeography, is the geotagging photos. You take a picture with your phone, the long lag gets put in there. And so you can use that to harvest it to make extra kind of, fun consumer stuff, So basically, if you look at what it is, you have web maps, you have fast dynamic maps. Here's our GIS over here. It's like, when do we want it? And they already said yes now. Our GIS shows up error, So it's really user-centric. That's the difference. Whenever you look at GIS, it's tool-centric. Every year, how many new tools you have available to you, all this flexibility, more cross-platform capabilities. That's what the kind of drive is here. And then, but in the Neogeography world, it's more about users and how do you have that person be happy and not pulling out their hair, or better yet, how do you have it usable for the grandma, or even better, how do you make it usable for a child? Okay, and so it's supposed to be easy and fun and so forth. Okay, and what it's kind of, you could say is that it's people interacting with place in a digital way, it's using your tools to interact with place. And a lot of people, especially on the human geography side, see geography as the study of places. And so this is a very ripe field, I think, for us to come in and actually make real contributions to how we understand the world. Okay, so I'm doing good. So I have case studies. I don't want to take too long on them, but basically, you have this new compass in 2012. The amount of GPS-enabled devices, period, out of consumers' hands were at 560 million, which sounds pretty impressive. That's more than the population of the United States. Yeah, the compass app's even better, right? Visual longitude, latitude there. And also, I don't know if you realize it works even when you're in airplane mode. When I sit on the plane, I stick my phone out towards the window and it'll pick up the GPS satellite and actually put a blue dot where I am on Google Maps. So you actually do have a GPS receiver in your phone that can work without the location services that are derived from cell towers and Wi-Fi base stations. So basically right now, our location is derived by a combination of all three things. There's a database of where every Wi-Fi base station is in the world. How do you think Google and other people got that database of what every SSID is and where it's located? From you all, okay? Like when I moved, I took my internet router, I plugged it in, I picked up my phone, I hit find me, and it put me back on my old place. And about like 1 minute later, it put me where I was supposed to be. The Wi-Fi, your Wi-Fi environment actually gives you that first location. So if they see those SSIDs, that's how they figure out where you are. GPS is slow. It takes about 3 minutes, 4 minutes to get a really good read off of it. So you see that 560 million, 2016, we're up to 3 billion. We're going into projections 2027, we got nearly 8 billion devices, users, actually. These aren't even devices anymore. These are people with operating devices. There's actually more devices that have been thrown away. And so right now, we have about 83% of the world's population having a smartphone. And this is actually probably the biggest impact right now on our society. When you think about it, social media and so forth. That's why Facebook is so, rich of a company. But also, if you think about now the war with Ukraine, how's that changing with citizen sensors, basically taking pictures and providing that as a mapping capability for people to see where things are happening. These places aren't far away anymore because you're just one WhatsApp picture away from seeing what's going on someplace. Okay. So what it breaks down to, this is not to scale, but here, this is us, right? And this is the potential geographic users. And so, the amount of information out there about the world is here now. It's not here. The hands have moved. And this has always kind of been a weird thing about GIS. When you look at photography in the past, it's always been governments who made the maps. And then it became GIS is for everyone. So it's not just a government agency. Now you can have participatory mapping, a nonprofit make a map. And then it moves on to now today where everyone is making maps more than the government can even make. So the question is, will Neogeography replace GIS? Some people said it already has. My answer is that it's going to be incorporated into GIS. And you can see this through Google taking OpenStreetMap data and just incorporating what they're doing. ArcGIS.com is based on that as well. And so that's one way we can see the participatory mapping, these kind of comments of play there. But you can even see already on ArcGIS.com, the survey 123 which basically gives you the ability to make a web form that someone can fill out a survey and will pull their GPS location off their phone and automatically integrate that into your AGOL geodatabase. So you can make these surveys kind of like with instead of using Qualtrics, you use survey 1, 2, 3 and actually pull some geographic information off the phone. So that's something to keep in mind. So I kind of want to look now at some case studies, okay? And so these are ways that I've utilized Neogeographic tools and how they actually helped make the studies better, number one. And then number two, you would be surprised, it's not all what you think. I'm not just harvesting data off the internet, you know, big data. It's actually, some of the stuff's pretty rudimentary, but it makes a big impact. And so back when I was in Austin, I was working with Elliot Treader over in Calgary, he's at Calgary now. And we were looking at the demographic makeup of Austin. And there's a big kind of like east-west divide of the city. There's a highway that goes through the middle of the town, but it is post-date the kind of segregation that happens. But basically you have the east side of town with minorities and the west side of town with the white affluent people. And so we kind of wanted to see what the origins of this type of racial segregation that we were seeing in Austin and other cities across the entire Sun Belt, very popular. Across where you have this segregation happening. Why is it so persistent so today? And a lot of times people will say, okay, well, it was things like zoning, racial zoning, Jim Crow laws. Oh no, it must have been the red line, you know, HOLC, Home Owners Loan Corporation red line. And we had an idea that actually those things are pretty new whenever you look at the city of Austin or any of these cities, but yet the segregation existed before those things went into place. So redlining, a lot of times, was actually a reaction to segregation that was already there. They surveyed realtors and they asked them, what part of town do you not want to sell a house? And then that became the hazardous area, which wouldn't get loans from the banks, okay? And we started looking at some of the origins of these suburbs around Austin, and we would see advertisements in newspapers that would say things like this: Hyde Park is exclusively for white people. So it was actually sold as like a feature to the neighborhood. You know, like you say, there's a swimming pools or, you know, whatever, easy transport, and it would say only for white people. So we're talking in, you know, 40s, 1930s United States. This stuff now is illegal, of course, but it doesn't change the fact that those things still exist on the deeds. Okay, so the way they would enforce this is that they would add this as a deed restriction. If anyone lives in a suburban neighborhood, you know what a deed restriction is. Basically, leave your trash can out, and you show up with a warning from the homeowners association saying you're going to get fined if you have your trash out on non-trash day. So this is the power in that contract with the deed is actually pretty powerful. You can put an injunction on someone's house, and then you can bring in the police power of the state to force sell that house. So whenever you have a restriction saying this is only for white people, if you go against that restriction, there's a legal remedy that can actually take care and actually force that segregation on. But in the 1960s, this was completely ruled illegal, and the Supreme Court said it's not allowed anymore, but they're still in the deeds. And so we wanted to see what was the play with this type of private zoning on later on public zoning, because before the city wasn't zoned, and then it became zoned where they used race as part of the criteria for zoning. And then later on with redlining, so when we see the segregation being reinforced, but the origins of that, where did that come from? Well, the problem is deeds are not easy to get a hold of and they're not mapped, okay? And especially deeds that are 70 years old. And so a lot of times they're written like this and they would have some rules in there. And so here's some kind of rules that you would see. No lots shall be sold or leased to any Mexican person or person of Negro blood. So that's restriction number 3A, okay? But then if you look at like other restrictions on here, they would have things like you cannot do things like sell alcohol. You can't do noxious gases. So these were types of zonings that you would put into your property deed to say, you know what, you're not gonna be living next to a bar or a brothel. You're not gonna be living next to a chemical plant. So this is kind of what we say today, the zoning, industrial zoning, entertainment zone zoning, and so forth. The properties you can guess that would allow someone of Mexican or Negro blood to live in didn't have these other zonings. So there was kind of an environmental injustice situation that started happening in Austin, where you see like the polluted neighborhoods, the industrial neighborhoods, places with hazards, like flood hazards and so forth, would be in the racial minority neighborhoods. Okay, it's kind of interesting because today it's the complete opposite. So now, if I'm in Austin, and I'm sure the neighborhoods around here are the same, but if I'm in Austin and say, imagine marijuana gets legalized. Okay, I don't think it's gonna ever happen in Texas. Imagine this. And I decide I want to open up a cannabis shop. I would not be able to do that in particular neighborhoods because the deeds would allow it. Yes, the racial restrictions have been removed, but the restrictions for immoral activities have not been removed. And so I wouldn't be able to sell intoxicating substances or even do immoral activities. I try to do that, get shut down. Now, if I go to East Austin, no more rules. I could change a house to a bar. I can knock it down, make a new mansion. I can do whatever I want. It's the Wild West because there's no rules. And those rules now aren't in. So these rules actually kind of solidify, they act as an engine, keeping the city the way it is, even though the racial restrictions have been taken away. That's the argument that Elliot and I were making in this report. You should read it, it's pretty nice. But now Neogeography, how do we do the mapping? Okay, this was gonna be a lot of work. We had to go to microfiche. You would have to look up every single property in Austin, look at their deed restrictions. We're talking ton, and then after somehow turn that into GIS. Okay, so that was and we had one summer to do it. Okay, with basically no money. So how do we do this? Okay, so we went, begged the county office to let us use the stuff, basically the microfiche machine for free, because that's what they usually charge people to do, because you want to know your deed restriction when you buy a property. So when you buy a property, there's this whole like information service industry on getting those deed restrictions to you. So we went down the master deed records, the plat maps, the original ones for Central Austin, and we kind of focused just on the pre-1947 boundaries, obtained those maps, we looked for the covenants. So how was this done? We had databases we went to, we pulled the map itself, scanned it, then we had the properties. There's some work that you can do like georeferencing, a lot of GIS work. Now, sometimes you see the restrictions are just written on the side in hand. It's like, oh wait, last second, I forgot, only white people. That happened sometimes back in the day. But so we would have to check here, we'd check here, and then we would have to check the individual records as well. So and also if you have a case where there's eminent domain where a property has been taken up by the state and then turned into university campus, for example, then those deeds are basically lost forever because the deeds are started over. Okay, but once these restrictions, by the way, once these restrictions get on the deed, they're there forever. They won't go away until the property gets dissolved back into the state. So it's kind of it goes back to English common law. So we found sometimes like this is no drinking. This is no, so this is the, oh yeah, you can't, this is the racial restriction here. So no person of African descent. Then here's about things like, don't make your house up to the wall, easements and things like that. So it's kind of hard. So how do we do this? I employed my class. Class sourcing. Okay, it's the crowdsourcing, class sourcing. They got a good GIS project out of it, and I had a total of 20 people instead of one. So instead of me plus 20, so 21 people, we knocked it out in a few weeks. It was pretty amazing. So we went through each one of those plots, and they basically attributed the subdivision map of Austin. So they'd go through and they would have to find the subdivision and then look at the image that we had scanned and say, okay, yes, I found a restriction here, and then code it out. And we did that all with Google Docs. Okay, so this is my Neogeography Google Docs. I haven't seen that, but they're attributing for us. Imagine if I had a single GIS file we're passing around, no way. And then at the same time, am I going to set up a GIS server to do all this? Maybe today you use ArcGIS Online, I would suggest. Back then, this was easiest, just do it on Excel, basically, and then join it later on to the shapefile. And so we had something like this where we would have the verbiage with codes in here, like, okay, this was a building restriction, no environmental restriction. And then here's like, okay, restriction, it would say African descent, yeah, so the sometimes that, there was some interesting, there was a moment we started finding a lot of people being restricted from Mongolia. Not allowed, but these are like, bad, they were basically just using words that they didn't understand. So they would call Asians Mongolians. So, but these restrictions, if you see them in other contexts, other states, sometimes they're restricting Irish people or Jewish people or Italian people, depending on which area of the United States you're going to. But you can see the dates here, 1918 and so forth. So after, it worked pretty well, but here was the problem. Here's what I learned from this experience with the students, is that there wasn't a good way to keep people to actually attribute who did what. It was just working on it. You know, everyone's just working. There's not really nice edit tags. So some good people were like, well, I did a lot of work, I'm not getting credit for it. And there was some kind of free writing that would happen in the case. That was kind of like hard to like say who gets credit, you know, and then if someone makes a mistake, then who gets the blame? So you're kind of trusting the group thing to work. But basically here's a map of the city that they made in 1928. This is part of their planning zoning that they were thinking when they started enacting initial zoning, and they're mapping out business properties, white residence properties, and then miscellaneous. So you can kind of guess what miscellaneous stands for, and then afterwards they even had more. We went through the archives and found actual documents from the city and so forth, where they actually had Negro, Mexican Negro, and then white. So they were mapping these out when they were trying to see what they should do with zoning. This geography was showing up this way because of the deed restrictions. And so it's kind of interesting is that the deed restrictions acted as a legacy that continued to get enshrined. Because then later, whenever you get your HOLC map come in, you start having restrictions saying that these are hazardous areas, which happen to be the areas that had no restrictions, but were also the minority neighborhoods. So, and then we can compare that, you almost overlay perfectly with racial restrictions, covenants. So these were the restrictions called covenant. Areas that were considered hazardous didn't have racial restrictions, or very few. Other areas, blue, the desirable neighborhoods to invest in, had lots of racial restrictions. How this translates to demographics. So you can see here the east-west divide. Okay. So how does this translate to demographics? Here we go. Here's 1940. This is a dot density map with race. So we have black and purple, and we have white people in blue. And you can see here, it's by the tract level, so it's not as perfect as we want. Later on, we get block level data, so you actually see better resolution, but you can see the general trend. Okay, here's the freeway I was telling you about. Okay, here's the minority neighborhood. This area is actually kind of interesting because this is Hispanic neighborhood. And so in this time period, especially in the 40s, Hispanic was actually seen as either white or black, not as the other category. It kind of changes. So we followed this through 1950s. I don't know, I changed the map. It's basically the same map, you know, 1960s, the same map. So now it's illegal to do any restrictions at all. 1970s, the same map. 1980s, the same map. Oh, here's where it becomes interesting. The other category. So now we're mapping non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic black, and other. And so this is where kind of otherization of Hispanic started coming in. I don't know what to check. You know, when someone's on the census, do I check white? Do I check black? Do I check? I don't know. So they check other. Okay, it's interesting because now this is where we get to the block level data. Yes, people aren't living in the river or at the state capital. Okay, but in the tract level data, you get that kind of generalization going on here. But you can see even better now the divides. So south part of East Austin is a Hispanic neighborhood. You can see it quite well with the other representation of the dot. Here is non-Hispanic black neighborhood, basically, and then here's the white neighborhood.
Where's campus?
The University of Texas is right here. And this is the state capitol. So, and then you have the state capitol complex right there. So this area here was neighborhoods before, you know, so it's got kind of like, you know, eminent domain. So we can't find those properties anymore. So it's interesting, in 2000, we had in the historical census data, we had Hispanic as its own class to be able to start picking out. And it was interesting to see this change here on this bottom section of Southeast Austin, where you really see the Hispanic neighborhood, black neighborhood. So we're talking 60 years of no change. And these neighborhoods are established in 1910, 1920, 30s. So we're talking almost 100 years of everything set, you know, and then post 1960, this, you know, it's illegal to do this type of zoning, it's still set. Now we move to 2010. So look here, pay attention to this part of the map. You'll see the demographic change. So what happened here? This is our global interdependence, where our economy, basically, especially under the World Trade Organization, saying all this stuff, trade. We globalized. All the industry left Austin and went to foreign countries, got offshored. This area is not an industrial area anymore. You build a dam here, so it's not a flood hazard anymore. You got rid of the flood risk. You got rid of the pollution. Hey, look how close I am to work, right? And then you get rid of also the social stigma. So the younger people, they're like, you know, I don't want to live in a white neighborhood. They're not thinking that way. They're thinking I want to bike to work. Race is not what their first thought is. So they don't mind living in this neighborhood. Maybe their grandparents would have minded. So all the negative things that were keeping them out flood the area. And so now you're seeing this area getting rapidly changed. I'm waiting for the 2020 data to come out, but I think 2020 is going to be blue. Austin is the largest city with a declining minority population. It's growing extremely quickly, but with a declining minority population. It's kind of interesting. So how does that change, that demographic change look in Austin? This goes to my second style project. This is that same area that we're looking at, East Austin. North of here, African-American neighborhood. South of here, Mexican-American, okay? So now you can imagine these houses were built and bought by grandparents and people who are living there right now. But whenever you go to that neighborhood today, you get two very different senses of places when you're hanging out. So if I go to Sam's Barbecue, I'm gonna see here a neighborhood. You can say, okay, East Austin, barbecue food, nice place, but you can see it's not swanky. It doesn't look like Southern California, right?
Yeah.
So this is also in East Austin, okay? So there's kind of like a colonization of East Austin happening where it's becoming a hip, trendy place, okay? So two very different senses of places. And so I got 5 people together and we said, let's go out and look at these places. We don't even need to, we could actually judge a book by its cover here. Just walk up, that looks like from California, that looks like the traditional East Austin. And so we went with 5 people, went around with Google My Maps, and we categorized the places as new and trendy or old school, basically. And this is the map that we created with Google My Maps. This is a pretty interesting way to collect data with teams because it becomes like a Google Doc. We made 2 layers. You see we collected 421 places that were old, looking at all the buildings and stuff, and 318 newer places. And basically we can look at the place. We can even Google the place name sometimes and not even have to worry about what longitude latitude we're at. And we just add it to the different layers. These layers, well, first of all, you can share it and you all edit it at the same time. Oh man, I broke the TV. Okay. Steven's coming to rescue. Well, you can share it, you can edit it all at the same time, which is nice. You don't have to worry about versioning control. And then if you look at the next little spot here, oh, thanks. You can actually export this to a KML. So once you export to KML, then you can bring it into GIS. So that's what I did. I exported to KML, brought it to GIS, did some interpolation to kind of look at the density of newness or density of oldness, put those 2 places together, and actually started seeing that gentrification that's happening in East Austin is actually quite complex, where you have a nice mix here, but this area is being dominated by new things. Okay, there's still a few old holdouts, but it's dominated by new things. And there's certain areas that are still traditional. So this is the change that's happening. The demographic change is actually happening almost in rural concentrations, where it's like, oh, this new development attracting more new development, that new development, and then it's spreading out. I think if I was to redo this project in a couple of years, that this would all be new. That's where the trends are going right now. There would probably still be some things that would stay because of influences, like, for example, tax exemption for churches actually keeps the Black churches in East Austin. So there's people who have actually moved out to East Austin who commute on Sunday to East Austin and still go to the church that they were always going to. Or the historically Black college and university, there's Houston Tilson in East Austin, it's always going to be there because the fact that it's sitting on basically taxes and land, there's not going to have that economic pressure to sell. Here, if you're living here in this house, your property taxes might be $1,000 a month. And so there's a point to where you're like, I can't afford to live in the house I own. And so what do? You say, I'm gonna clean up, I'm gonna sell, I'm gonna move to Houston. And that's what's kind of going on with Austin, right? Okay, and then who comes in? Someone who's working at Meta, all right? Facebook, Apple, all these high-tech companies. So this is kind of like you can see the Silicon Valley effect on Austin right now. And who knows, with the way Gainesville's going, you know, the technopoles, we kind of have the same kind of flirting with innovation districts and so forth. I think you're gonna see the same kind of trend happening in East Gainesville. Actually, I saw a billboard.
It's already happening.
Yeah, I saw a huge billboard next to the airport and said, why not live on the east side of Gainesville? And something, it was like pictures of people riding bikes. I was like, I never saw a billboard for gentrification before. So, but you know, the key interoperability between these tools and GIS is going to be your KML, GeoJSON, these markup languages, the servers will just spit out to you. And then once you do that, you just bring it in, and then you get you basically import it in the lake. So that's how I break the two things. But even at other projects. So this one is actually kind of interesting because the students didn't realize that they were basically GPS units with their phones. And so I was working with someone in Spanish who wanted to understand linguistic landscapes. And basically what she studies is whenever you see the signs, and you know, it's in two languages, it's in English and in Spanish, you know, and it's funny because they actually go through, they look at how bad the Spanish is sometimes. And those two signs, like the Spanish is like really broken grammar. Sometimes like someone who wrote this doesn't know how to actually speak Spanish. And so she was going through this kind of idea of cataloging signs, and I was like, we should really go further with this and try to see if we can unearth some demographics that are going on with these signages. So on spring break, all the students went all over Texas, back home. They took pictures wherever they were at, and they brought those pictures back in. And then we just took advantage of the fact that the photos are geotagged. So we have a long lat, and then we have a picture of the sign that they saw. They went through similar thing with spreadsheets, started categorizing these signs, all in Spanish, all in English, mixed Spanish, English, mixed with other languages. And we basically, here's our little workflow we did. Took the pictures, extracted the points, interpreted, KML'd it in Google Earth, brought it into ArcMap, and started comparing demographics. So the question I was trying to find out was, do the signs reflect the population that's around? If you see a sign that's in Spanish, are there people who are Spanish speaking moving around that sign? That's the idea. And what level does that happen at? And so here, for example, is a shopping center, you know, so we have here all the different photos that they went through, and each one of these we categorized, okay? And then afterwards, we went through and actually did the expression. And this is what here's what we came up with, okay? So basically, if you look at the blue bar, that's Hispanic population. Red bar is Spanish speaking at home. So since it's asked this question, what's your predominant language at home? For the 2010 census for individual block groups or tracts, I can't remember what we were using. So here's English with the other language, and here's English monolanguage. It was interesting because in our groups in Texas, it hit 40% level of Hispanic population, Spanish speaking population. We had basically English the dominant language, okay? We had to hit 60+% before we started seeing Spanish being incorporated into signs. You'd think once you had a majority of people speaking Spanish, the signs would show up. But actually, you had to go a little bit higher than majority in order to get the signs coming in. That was kind of interesting thing that we found. But here, for example, same little stretch of area, same town, 12% speaking Spanish. In this neighborhood, all the signs were in English. We started moving down to downtown area, 25% speaking Spanish. We started seeing some things, you know, this is a very specific case or whatever, but we started seeing things like few signs that had some Spanish in it. But once you start moving down to even more Spanish speaking in the South, Georgetown, you started having some signs with more Spanish. Again, there was a limitation here because we're using census data. And where's your census data tied to? Where you live, not where you work, not where you go, you know, where you travel by. And so, you know, maybe a gas station here might be the gas station that's en route for, you know, whole neighborhoods that might be at higher levels of Spanish than just the surrounding neighborhoods. So it was kind of a limitation there as well. But this is one thing that you can think about. Your phone, you just take a picture, you interpret the photos, and you pull the GPS tag off Okay, so got a couple minutes. I want to go over this one real quick. So there was some flooding that happened in Akari, yes. You can tell I didn't go there. Okay, I use Neogeography to map Acre, very remote area of Brazil, and there wasn't a gauging station for the flooding that took place here. So in Rio Branco, they had a gauging station in lots of big city or whatever. But when you go up to these smaller towns like this, we didn't have. There wasn't a real electronic gauging station. So the people I was working with were like, we really want to see how the hydrograph is working because of all the deforestation that's been taking place, or you can say almost reforestation that's been taking place after the rubber forest has been kind of recovering in that area. And so if you look here, this is the river, this intersection here between those two rivers is where we were interested in, but we didn't have gauging information there. So we could have modeled it with head graphs or something like that. But instead, I was like, let's try to see what we can find on social media. It's a natural disaster. People are interested in what's going on. And so I started scouring the internet. And so for some information. So here's some pictures of the main city that was flooded out. You can see here, people building housing maybe where they shouldn't be. Okay. Again, like, this is Rio Branco, the big city. You can see here the amount of, it's just pretty impressive to fill that much. Now, we're interested in here, how we're going to find the gauge information there. Well, in this much smaller town, I looked on the internet a bunch and I found a blog. And so I was like, wow, they're taking pictures of all different, manual gauges that are sitting out there. I can't get exactly a discharge. I can get a stage level. So that's kind of interesting. So I went and collected their pictures, read their descriptions, what was going on. Here's like the flooding happening in the city. Next day, it's kind of a disaster that kind of happened. The bridges being flooded out. And again, they're always taking pictures. Look at where the river is. Look at where the river is. And so I took that information and plotted on a hydrograph. Right, over time, what the stage level was. And it's kind of interesting. I got the rising wind from it, but as soon as the river started receding, no one cared anymore. Okay, so this is one of the situations I'm saying. This is interesting. You can maybe use Neogeography to figure out. Once that goes back down, that's where you need agency to step in. Do that continuous monitoring. You're not going to be able to get that because the bias of people are interested in the disaster. All right. If you remember this from Foundations or 5 years ago when I came to the campus, where's the Southwest? I won't go too much into it, but here I was also using a survey and I was giving people the capabilities to actually define their own vernacular understanding of the Southwestern region of the United States. And so if you see like here, like it's the elementary school idea, they learned the Southwest. Actually, I just saw my kids' book from a couple years back and they had this almost exact, I think that's the exact same picture for the Southwest. I was like, no, man. So here's the Southwest defined to an elementary school. Here's Southwest defined to Wikipedia. This is almost a precipitatory mapping right here. Wait, people define this as a group. Here's the Southwest divided by the AAG. Embarrassing, right? Okay. But I wanted to see what would people say their Southwest is. And there's a lot of work done with this in the past, vernacular geographies, either mapping it through proxy or asking people directly through surveys. Where are you from? Zelensky did through proxy, so he's looking for geographic names and businesses, and that's where he got this map of the Southwest. Looks like the AG, huh? This is back in the 70s, okay? Later on, Terry Jordan did this with Texas, asking people, what county are you from and what vernacular would you use, like Hill Country or Rio Grande Valley or Gulf Coast. You can imagine doing this for Florida. Which coast are you from and which county are you from? And you can map out where people see themselves from. And you can see the pretty detailed geography here of really quite complex, actually, how people view their vernaculars. So remember, vernacular geography is just how we talk about this. Where does downtown Gainesville really start? So that's it's kind of more of a blur, right? And so I wanted to see how this worked. And I made this this website survey. Let's see if I can get this to work. Just of course, no. Should have pre-opened it, huh? At the control click. Oh, there it goes. Okay. So, but the person who goes to the survey is able to, in theory, yes, no. I had to escape out of it to make this work, huh? And there he goes. Oh, it's still thinking. Okay. Well, the person who goes to the survey is actually able to digitize where they think the Southwest is and then provide that to the survey, which then later on I could use to make the mapping. Okay, so that's not going to work. So we're just going to move on. So anyways, so you actually draw your own polygon, and people who've taken my class, I make you guys do that in the first day of class. So you've already done it. And the idea there is that if you let people define their own places themselves, you get a better view of actually where they are. Okay, here. quick review of everything you learned. Yeah, you gotta watch out. Multiple choice. Okay, so the first person who did it was someone on my master's committee, Peter Dana. He worked with GPS a lot. He was in the Coast Guard and was on some of the teams actually with the satellites. That's a pretty fun guy to work with. He drew this out as a Southwest. He's a very technical guy. He never considered himself a GIS person. He said, I'm a human geographer first. Okay, and so you can see this human geography coming in where he said the political border between the United States and Mexico doesn't matter to me. I'm drawing my Southwest into northern Mexico. After that, it was all anonymous. I don't know who did what. The next person, I have no idea who did that, okay? So anyways, I took those, rasterized them, and then added them together. Take foundations if you want to learn that. And I got this kind of result here where I got what the Southwest is. And this is old. This is from my preliminary study. I need to clean this up. But you get a kind of good idea of where people sit the Southwest. You see political boundaries play a role in where people are clicking. You have Arizona and Mexico, definitely part of Southwest. When we start going to Nevada, people start getting a little bit questionable. Is that really Southwest or not? And in Texas, West Texas is Southwest, but East Texas isn't so much Southwest. I break this down by demographic groups and stuff to see how different people related to the Southwest. Okay, so I made it this far, which is great. I'm almost done. So this is where things can kind of go wrong. I have a collection of things that kind of broke with people. So like, for example, here, not the airport, right? But, in photography, we might move things away from where they actually are, not to have a crowded map space. But whenever you digitize that, and then all of a sudden you can zoom in on it and put you here instead of the actual airport, because they don't want to put the symbol for the airport so close to the highway. So that's basically what's going on here. Or we all know that aerial imagery is not that accurate. There's some residual error from ground control points that we just did in the remote sensing class. So the few meters off of the ground control points actually messing up with where the four corners is actually. So this is where the aerial georeferenced image is, but the actual four corners. So people could be, this is what happens when you have a non-expert user. Oh, this is funny. So Google allowed you to actually edit their maps, and someone went and made a forest of Android. So this is like forest land cover. So you start having some things like these vandalism kind of things happening, or you can have stuff that's a little bit more malicious, like Googling the N-word and it goes to the White House when Obama was president, or the change of Trump Tower to Dump Tower, or finding the president of Mexico's the version of their White House called the official residence of corruption. So you have some kind of these things happening as well. This is kind of fun. Our student got Google to change the name of the street and name it after him. Hacking the system. So, or you might also get invasions. Okay, so you have Nicaragua invade Costa Rica, basically because Google messed up on their map and they put the international border here and it's over there. So they said, oops, and they said, so the general used this as a little excuse to invade. Putin's right now thinking, I should have thought of that one. No. Or a demolition company going to the wrong house and demolishing a house. They're supposed to demolish the neighbors.
That's happening in Gainesville.
That's happening in Gainesville?
Oh, yes.
Man, imagine how I'd be mad. It's like the no-knock warrants too, where they go to the wrong house all the time. It's just like, so glitch on Google Maps. Or no island. You know this from GIS, huh? And it was like, I'm off, I have water. And as you zoom out, you're off the coast of Africa, you made a mistake. Okay, this is where 0 degree longitude, 0 degree latitude is. This is like where everything digitizing goes to die. I actually have a nice little example. I don't know if it's going to work now, but this is my last slide. So if it works, great. So on Google, every year they do this little Santa tracker, and I wanted to have fun with this. It had this little Google Maps version of the North Pole, and you can do like Street View and everything. And so I took a picture of my kid, this one, and in France, it's illegal to have vaccine. So this is in France. And you have, the Santa has to be skinny. It's like legally, or you get like, there's no, you can't even stuff his stomach or, you know, like, so here's skinny Santa with my kid. I thought it was like Santa Con, you know, at first, like what's going on? But no, they used the actual Santa. And so I took this picture and I tagged it. You can see here, I tagged it to North Pole in the map. You can go there. But now if you look, North Pole doesn't exist anymore. So they deleted the North Pole off Google Maps. It doesn't exist. So now my photos hanging out in Mill Island with the street view of the Santa's workshop. That's what was all over there. So. So I wanted to say, you can still have fun with Neogeography, right? So basically, for conclusion, the new geographic tools, I believe, are going to be incorporated to GIS platforms, like we're seeing with Survey 123. We're just not going to be talking. We're not going to say Neogeography anymore. There's a lot of errors that exist in these data sets, so you got to be careful. You have to look at them critically. You also have to be careful about other people who are not experts making analysis off the data sets, because they don't know what they're talking about sometimes. If you're relying on volunteer geographic information, you're not going to get that falling limb of your hydrograph. Okay, people are only going to be interested at a certain particular time. And then, oh yes, you should start thinking about this, incorporating these tools, so crowdsourcing tools, and do class sourcing. I think it's a great way to involve, especially undergraduates, getting a research experience, and it takes you from having to do so much busy work, you know. So you get the whole class to do the whole thing, you know, in a week, as opposed to you doing all summer. Just time. So, any comments, questions? Thank you.
You actually run code to scrape the geotags from the photos? Or did you have
I didn't have to, because I used, well, Picasa's not around anymore.
Right.
But there was a ability for Picasa to upload your photos there, and it would just let you download them as KML. And so, but there is tools like that now that you can take a whole set and you will, you know, basically make a KML file that's connected to your photos, directly to your photos.
Can we do that with people photos? Who might be 18.
Those might need a little bit of interpretation.
Well, you know, you always take photos and training samples, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's, so for example, in my field work, I was really afraid that my GPS unit was going to mess up on me and lose all my points. I just heard this so many times from, you know, graduate students say, oh, I went to Ecuador, I came back and I plugged in my GPS and all my points are gone. And so I would take pictures of my GPS unit. If you do that though, make sure you turn off the airplane mode. The receiver, the phone signal will actually mess with the GPS signal. But if you turn off the airplane mode, your phone will still get the GPS signal, and so it'll geotag the photo, and then you can also take a picture of the screen,
Right.
and then you have, you know, at least the information without having to write it down. Yeah, so that's one little trick I always did. Yes.
This map in particular, have you seen instances of cities using it to try to pick up vulnerable areas?
No, I mean, I should do something with this map. I should put it out there in the world, because it's a pretty interesting, yeah, it's a pretty interesting idea. You know, you could, I was working with some planning people, that's what I was working with, and they were trying to get this, like, that's why you see these blue circles here. These are distances from downtown Austin or from the University of Texas. So the idea is you're within a certain mile range. Their idea was that the gentrification would be happening within these blue circles because of proximity. So you wouldn't see as much out here as over here. And the thing is, this is also happening because of other economic forces that are taking place. Who's willing to sell what's there already? You know, if it's a, yeah. So basically, these people were willing to sell, so they sold, and then that has a ripple effect as it goes out. So, but yeah, I think it's a pretty nice way to visualize it. I was trying to get two colors that makes it better, and I didn't think I did a very good job. I should have done red and blue, so you can see these kind of in between zones as purple. That's what I should have done, was to redo this map. Great.
See if there are any questions online.
Oh, yes.
Nancy, just in case.
So online people, you have any questions? Zoom.
We're all good?
I don't see any hands up.
Thank you very much, Anwar.
Thank you.
So you like the training center?